Good afternoon. Welcome to Brothers of Men. Today I wanted to discuss a little bit about the prison industrial complex, both the legislative side and the corporate side. And in case you don't know things like this, I wanted to shed some. Oops, I wanted to shed some light on it um, because it is an epidemic going on in our country. Um, we're almost at 3 million people in prison right now. 3 million people, that's almost 10% of our entire population. Now we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prison population. Chances are 1 in 4 of us, aren't that bad. I think it's like 1 in 4 um, black Americans will go to jail at one point in their life. Um, And I don't think that is an accurate statistic. Um, do I believe you should go to jail for murder or rape or stuff like that? Yes, I do. Do I think you should go to jail for, having an addiction or smoking weed? No, because it doesn't solve anything. But I want to walk through kind of the history, the basic history. I'm not going to go into any great detail. The basic history of the legislation of the prison system and see how we got to where we are today. Um, because we all didn't just wake up and have these astronomical numbers. It didn't happen overnight. And that's the way it works with everything. That's the way it's worked with globalism. That's the way it works with taking away guns, taking away other rights. It happens baby steps at a time. It doesn't happen overnight. If you've ever heard the parable about the frog in a pot of water, if you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, he'll jump out. If you put a frog in cold water and then turn up the heat, the frog will sit there and as it gets hotter and hotter, he will sit there because he has assimilated to the temperature and he will boil to death. So that's basically how this has worked. Now, the modern penitentiary was started uh, at the beginning of our country. The modern penitentiary, as we think of it. Penitentiary comes from the word repent or repentance, which is a biblical word meaning to turn away from. And that was the original goal of uh, prisons, was to get uh, criminals to turn away from their lifestyle and become, normal citizens. So that's where it all got its start. Now, uh, fast forward to the 1960s and 70s. Richard Nixon started the war on drugs and the war on crime. So the war on whatever wasn't even a phrase up until that point in time. Now, hindsight being 2020, uh, I believe, and most people believe, that we went about the war on drugs the wrong way. You can't have a war on drugs. Just like we had prohibition, people still got drunk. More people died because of drinking. I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically like a fake liquor, and people got gut rot and died. So that actually made things worse, and eventually we ended prohibition anyway. So it was a waste of time. Uh, but guys like Elliot Ness, FBI agents and whatnot, uh, believed that they were doing a good thing because the government said so. Uh, so I believe the war on drugs is a waste of time, and I don't believe the government has any right to tell you what you can and can't do with your body, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And that's the way this country was for almost 200 years. So, moving on. So, Richard Nixon starts the war on drugs and makes marijuana like a Schedule 1 narcotic, which anybody who knows anything about drugs knows that marijuana has never killed anybody and knows that of the drugs that are out there, that's probably the safest one. Uh, so you have that. Now, Ronald Reagan kind of doubled down on the war on drugs. Now, also back then, you had a lot of unrest. You had a lot of um, terrorist groups. I believe there was one called the Weather was it the Weatherford Group or something like that. Uh, the Black Panthers, things like that, things that the government were afraid of, and they had propaganda to make other people afraid of it too. When it really wasn't that bad. Uh, the man who led the Black Panthers, he was a very young man. I believe he was only like 21. Uh, he led the Black Panthers, and he was a very well-spoken man, and I agreed with a lot of what he said. And he was assassinated by police in his apartment at 4:30 in the morning, lying in bed next to his pregnant girlfriend. And then, of course, you had the assassinations in the 60s. JFK, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. So there was a lot of civil unrest going on at the time. Crime was on the rise. So they passed these legislations to try and fix what they thought was the problem. Now, unfortunately, uh, that didn't fix the problem. It made it worse. So Ronald Reagan doubled down and gave us what we know today as the war on drugs. With the FBI and what's the other one? The alcohol, the ATF. Uh, really beef those agencies up and turn your local police into a small SWAT team uh, and try to deal with a lot of the crime. Now, what they didn't see, and hindsight is 2020, is the problem wasn't necessarily the drugs or the drug use. I believe statistically, more people today are doing hard drugs like heroin and cocaine than they were back in the 80s. The thing was it was a very lucrative business, and they had really tightened down the vice on drugs, and that messed with the wrong people's money. And that's why you have all these bloodbaths in like Miami-Dade County. Um, that's where all of those things came from, was people having their money taken from them. And I don't know about you, but if you take my money, we're going to have a problem, and I don't care who you are. So, and like I said, hindsight is 2020. This is a nonpartisan video. I'm looking at this strictly unbiased because it has been both sides that is responsible uh, for the prison problem that we have today. So, after Reagan, you had Bush, and then after Bush, you had Clinton. Clinton passed the 1994 crime bill, which had things like mandatory minimums, the three strike law, among other things, truth in sentencing, things like that. Now, the thing that I don't understand um, when it comes to nonviolent versus violent crimes, a person can commit a violent crime. Now, I'm not saying a violent crime being you come home and catch your wife in bed with somebody else. That one I can kind of see you getting off on. However, breaking into a 20-year-old woman's house, raping her, killing her, and then setting her on fire, uh, I don't get that one. I have never understood rape. I've never understood how that could excite somebody like that. I've never understood that. Uh, like I want the person, whoever I'm with, I want them to want me. Some woman crying and like that's just I'd never understood that. And I think people who do that kind of thing, uh, I think awful things should happen to them, just to put it mildly. So a person who does something like that, rapes, murders, sets on fire, and this happened to a woman that my wife knows. It happened to her daughter. She's 20 years old. She had been married for 5 months. Her husband was at work. A man broke into her home, raped her, killed her, set her on fire. The man got 8 years and served four, I think, something like that. Now, this is a violent criminal. This is somebody who potentially could end more more anybody's life if he wanted to. And he can go to jail for 4 or 5 years. Now, somebody who is doing cocaine in their apartment gets caught with a couple of grams of cocaine or whatever it is, can go to jail for 10 to 15 years for a non-violent crime. They're not doing anything to anybody. And what that has done is that has ripped our families apart, especially in minority, lower class neighborhoods, because there's no there's no jobs around there. There's nothing to give them sustenance. You might be lucky to go get a job, flipping burgers somewhere for minimum wage, but if you've got kids, that's not going to cut it. So what do? You do the only thing you can. You sell drugs, and then you get caught, and then you go to jail. And then when you get out, you've got a record and you can't get a job. So our whole prison system is screwed up. And it has been screwed up by both sides of the government, by Republicans and Democrats. And we, as American people, have let that happen. And then the same American people turn around and complain about, illegal drug sales going on in their neighborhoods. Uh, things like that, things that are directly contributed to men, fathers going to jail for selling drugs. When if you decriminalized it, if you brought jobs back in and gave these men opportunities, they wouldn't need to do that. But at the end of the day, you got to eat. At the end of the day, you got to feed your kids. You got to have a place to live. And, you know, if you live, like if you're around the Tulsa area, if you live at 36th Street North over there in the projects, in the housing projects that, there's Section 8 apartments over there. Uh, and that's about it. There's one gas station over there. There's nothing over there. No entry level jobs because, a lot of those people don't have cars. So what are they supposed to do for money? They hustle. So we have created this monster and we need to fix it. So that's basically it. That's kind of a short and sweet version of what's wrong with our prison systems legislatively. Now, as far as the prison systems on the corporate level, I don't know if you know this, but it is not illegal for a judge or a lawyer or a cop or a chief of police or anybody to own stocks or own anything in a privately held prison system. So let's say I'm a judge, and let's say I own the land that this prison is built on. Now, the prison gets paid by the government. They get paid X amount of dollars per convict. And uh, they actually get bonuses uh, for every so much. So that's why our prison systems are overflowing with men because they have incentive to have as many people in jail as they can manage. So if I'm a judge, it's in my best interest to keep the prisons full because if I keep the prisons full, I get paid. And if I'm a warden, I keep the prisons full because I get paid. So, see, you are incentivizing putting people in jail, and that's okay in this day and age. We have made that okay. Nobody has said anything about it. Well, very few people. There's a man called Dr. Kent Hovind, Kenthovind, wrote a book called The Kennel, which I own. And he writes it as a man looking at a dog kennel, and it's kind of written like Animal Farm is to communism, the kennel is to the prison system. Okay, and he goes through and describes how crooked our prison systems are and how many people benefit from overcrowding our prisons, from people keeping people from getting parole, keeping people in there longer than they're supposed to be, because for every body that's in there, they get paid. So there's that aspect. So what do we do about this? How do we fix this? What laws can we pass? What laws can we retract to fix our prison systems? Because I promise not every person in prison is a homicidal maniac. And we're ruining families. Sons and daughters are growing up without mothers and fathers because of what's going on in our prison systems. So leave me your thoughts. Please like the channel or subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Leave me your thoughts, open discussion, keep it respectful, and we'll talk to you again soon. All right? Be good to each other.